You can tuck in a little more here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And let me bring this a little bit. Good morning.
Good morning.
That was your line. You missed your cue.
I'm sorry. Well, welcome to another installment of the Alan and Jeff Show.
It's the Jeff and Alan Show. We just haven't decided. Our board members are locked in a battle royale to figure out what the title of this program should be. In any case, we are here. So, cheers.
Cheers.
Good morning. Yeah.
Can I ask a question really quick? If
You may
talk
ask
about
a
our
question, yeah.
board members, does that count as a housing fund? Like because of boards and
Didn't I told the audience last week we would be insulating them from all the housing puns. But once again, you're violating the bylaws.
it's true. This is very true.
Anyway, we do like the decor here. It's very nice here. Habitat for Humanity Restore, and Julia's makes great local coffee. But the reason we're so giddy is, I guess, we have really serious stuff to talk about this morning, right? I mean, this is the most serious stuff that any candidate really talks about, and it's the most challenging because we're in a military district. You know, there's a major base here. There's a lot of veterans. This is the Bible Belt. This is a lot of appreciation for what we've done overseas, and not like where we're originally from. So we're going to start off today by talking about, first of all, our platforms and how we communicate this to voters. As I said a little earlier on the teaser on another channel, I said that during 2018, I was able to claim that I was the only anti-war candidate in the race. It's pretty clear that Mark Harris was still pushing out Republican talking points about making sure that our troops had the right equipment and their logistic chains were all in place. So none of those American boys would be caught out there with a truck with a flat tire for more than a couple of days. And so, the one of the times I appeared with him, that's what he said. And McCready, of course, is just not saying anything, but we know he's former military, and we know he's enthusiastic about restocking the Army. And
Even in terms of, border patrol, you think about strengthening the military-industrial complex. You look at his platform about building more drones and more high-tech equipment down there on the border. And
right.
While it's not specifically war, I mean, we could consider that.
And that's one of the topics we're going to talk about, because eventually we're going to get into this idea of the military-industrial complex, which Eisenhower introduced back in 1960 in his farewell speech. We're going to talk a little bit about the cronyism and the profiteering that happens. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about my platform and the things that I was saying, and then we'll hand it over to you so you can talk about how you communicate this to green voters and swing voters. Because again, I used to say, when I stepped out in 2018, that I was the only anti-war candidate, and so a couple of times I had a technique where I asked people to raise their hand if they knew that we were fighting in Afghanistan for 17 years, and most people raised their hand, and then I said, okay, now raise your hand if you think we should stay in Afghanistan. And of course, nobody kept their hands up. And then just to emphasize the point, I would say, I'm going to give you another chance. I'm going to ask you to, answer that again, to think about it. And no one raised their hand. So that was a good moment of a little bit of political theater that I could get people to respond like that. We know that there's not a lot of enthusiasm for the Afghanistan war. And so one of the things we need to talk about is this disjoint between what people actually believe and what they say during the primaries and how they vote versus what eventually transpires. So I did talk about that. I talked about the U.S. efforts in Syria and how those were very misguided and how we should be withdrawing. I talked about how we should not be threat inflating with Russia. So remember, all during this time, we were subject to the spectacle of Russiagate, which is deflating as we speak in light of the Mueller hearings. So I don't believe that we should be aggressive with Russia, which is a nuclear power, and I agree with candidate Trump when he said we should be doing business with them, not be threatening them with our nuclear arsenal. So that was my approach on the campaign trail, to talk about American belligerence and bullying. Originally, I had some things to say about sanctions and some of the laws that have been passed in recent years and then fortified. We're going to talk a little bit about that too. But I think this anti-war message came across pretty well. I did meet obviously a lot of Democrats and swing voters who are very sympathetic to it, and that's a whole other story. But I'll let you intervene now that and I'll have a sip of my fantastic cortado here.
Yeah, no, I think that maybe one of the reasons that the message resonates with so many people across the entire political spectrum, or I should say, in all corners of the political spectrum, is it resonates with me personally because we've been at war my entire adult life. I was 18 years old when 9/11 happened, and now it's weird to think about this, but we've been at war this whole time. And we talk about supporting our troops, and we talk about the military, but you think about like the effect that has on families, people who want to start lives, people have their kids,
right,
who have gone to war, have picked up these M16s and gone and been willing to kill other people, just in the name of what freedom, American exceptionalism, which we'll get to
that's
in a little bit. But I think that's one of the reasons that it resonates, is because people are just weary of war, because that's what we've been doing for so long.
Right. So there is this disconnect between the kind of war weariness that you and I experience personally, and with members of our parties and our friends and relatives. So there is that, and that I think does explain somewhat Trump's success during the Republican primary, and then in the general election, because he was perceived, for better or worse, and we can talk about that, as more of a peace candidate, a guy who's willing to do business. And I remember reading something real interesting. It's probably a tweet, but someone just remarked, what if it turns out that being a hardcore New York real estate developer who has to deal with New Yorkers, the government, the unions, perhaps the mob, and all of these difficult people. What if that is actually the best preparation for dealing with someone like North Korea, Kim Jong-un? and it's possible.
Yeah.
It's possible that he may behind the scenes have some negotiating skill set that we may not be aware of because we're offended by his tweets, and he is somehow irrational to a lot of people. Right? So talk a little bit about the Democratic side, because the Democrats only have, at least in the presidential primary, they've only got 3, maybe 4 candidates who are explicitly anti-war,
right?
And that I think that includes Mike Gravel, the great Mike Gravel, and Marianne Williamson.
That's right.
And of course Tulsi Gabbard, who is if I were a Democrat, I would be supporting Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, she's quite good on this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of who else has expressed any sort of anti-war sentiment other than Bernie, but his voting record doesn't really indicate that he's as anti-war as Tulsi. Do you have anything else to say about your party and your program here? Because Jill Stein was very good on these issues back in 2016. I was impressed watching her on the news and watching her state about cuts in military spending.
Right. Yeah. And the Green Party nationally, and again, as y'all know, we've mentioned this before, National Green Party, there's the Federation of State Parties. So we all have slightly different platforms, but by and large, I mean, we are the party of nonviolence in the same way that you all are.
Yeah.
You know, we believe in nonviolence. We believe in peace, and to that extent, to that end, we believe in demilitarization and anti-imperialism. We want to scale back our military. Our Green New Deal that we came up with is scaling back our military spending by 50%, which doesn't just bring lots of money back to our country that we can invest in our infrastructure, but it helps us get our military out of other countries, right? We believe in the sovereignty of other states.
That's right.
States. And I believe you all do too. Exactly.
Yeah. And so to her credit, Dr. Jill Stein's credit, she did say that. She talked about 50%, a 50% cut. Gary Johnson, to his credit, at least took the Pentagon's own figure, which was 20%.
Yeah.
So Jill Stein was actually more aggressive on this topic than our front runner.
Right.
So we won't quibble about that. So having said that, let's sort of go back to the beginning, which is what we think is the model of regime change that we see around the world. And so if you just go back, and I don't mean to sound like a poli-sci professor here, and I won't, but the military-industrial complex was a new idea to a lot of people in Eisenhower's era. And remember, just 7 years earlier than 1960, in 1953, we participated in the coup of 53, which is overthrowing the legitimate leader, Mossadegh, of Iran, and then helping the British. Whether we were helping the British were helping us, I guess, is for historians. But our covert activities were instrumental in overthrowing Mossadegh and installing Pahlavi, the Shah, whose descendants are still around and trying to get back into power. So when I was in high school, in the early 70s, the Shah was notorious as a bad guy, and there was a lot of dissident literature in the United States, certainly in California, about what a terrible, horrible person he was. And in retrospect, historically, we do know that all of those very bad things happened. So then in 79, when they revolted against him, and we got something people can say was arguably worse, we kind of only have ourselves to blame. So that's kind of and here we are, 40 years later, 79 to 2019, we're looking at going to war with Iran again.
Right.
But people appear to have a blind spot about 1979. They sort of think that our history with them started in 79, and they kind of blank out when they think about 53 to 78.
Yeah, isn't that weird?
Yeah, isn't that funny how that works out?
And so much of that was based on economics, and it's almost like economically strong-arming a nation because of the policy. So if you look at this, whether they're memos or telegrams through the CIA, they have we want to install this person as the leader because they will favor Western-friendly policies, right? And so
that's right.
The democratically elected leader was looking into auditing all of the oil companies that I think were partially owned by the British at the time. Is that right? And now they're part of BP.
That's right. They are part of British Petroleum now. That's true. So there were commercial interests involved, and of course we talk about it in the shadow of what was going on in the Cold War between the Soviet Union. So a lot of people like to think about it as it's something we had to do because Iran's sitting there on these oil fields, and we're in a competition for resources with the Soviet Union, and so we need to forget about the fact that the Soviet Union may historically want some buffers around itself to protect itself because it doesn't have oceans. Forget all that stuff. We're going to go in and we're going to run their oil system. So fast forward to 2019, I guess back then it was still, I don't know how it was portrayed to the public back then. I don't know what the American public was actually knew about this as it was going on in real time in 1953, but I do know how it's going on in real time now. So if you think about this, the model, right, the regime change model that we're in agreement on, right? So in Venezuela, it was rather open. And I can't remember whether it was Bolton or Pompeo or both of them that simply said, we want the oil. And I don't know if that comes as a shock to people, or whether whether it's the average voter or a concerned voter, a Republican or Democrat, whatever, whether they would hear something like that and go, yeah, that's a good idea to go take over a country and kick out the socialist SOB at the top and take their oil. That seems to me like it would really be a good idea. I'm not sure if there's a lot of American voters, except those tied to this military-industrial complex, think that that's a good idea. So go ahead, Alan.
Yeah. So the other thing that you're kind of leaving off here too is that component about the way that they go about regime change, which is very deceptive. And so they create these social movements that look like upheaval within a country. And so you have this kind of double benefit for the people on that side. Is not only do you get to go in and you get to pick the leader of a country from our side, but you also get to demonstrate to the world how awful socialism is, and how awful socialist leaders are.
Right.
This does not work. Look what happens when you try to.
So let's we know that anti-socialist and anti-communist movements are real. There are people like me. I'm anti-communist. I think you're anti-communist. Violent revolution, right?
Well, yeah, we don't want.
Yeah, but I'm also fundamentally anti-socialist in my outlook. So I believe, and this is a division within my own party, right? Because we believe that. For example, in the case of Venezuela, there are people on the ground, and they're professional people, and members of the professional class, and their businesses are getting strangled, and they're finding out that they're the recipients of. Let me clarify that they're subject to redistribution plans of the government, and so. As just a normal American citizen, a capitalist, and a person who says, yeah, people should be able to run their businesses, I look at that and go, yeah, you should be protesting that because they're trying to take away your livelihood. So when just as a small part of this, when I was protesting against the Venezuelan intervention with the Greens up near Winston-Salem, we did have a guy come around, and he was holding his phone up the whole time, and he was asking us, look, I was down there, I was a doctor or something like that, and he was very angry. So I'm certainly sympathetic to that. So then the question becomes, well, what is it that we can do, and what policies are we going to support of our government? Now, I think you and I, when we get to the agreement point, is that they got to figure out they've got to figure that out for themselves. We can offer asylum for people who are leaving places that are trying to, that are subject to the tyranny of a government, so that's one way out. But why would we intervene? And I know, what would be the rationale? I mean, what do you think, when voters see a situation like that? And because there are tyrannies in the world. Sure. There are places that are very bad. We know North Korea is a very bad place to be. We know that Venezuela. Cuba used to be, a bit of a hellhole. So, what do you do? I mean, because people, our voters are going to say, look, there are dangerous places, and they're starving their people, they're enslaving their people, whether you want to call it whatever it is you want to call it. They're doing bad things to their people. What is our role? I mean,
yeah, I think that we, at least the Green Party, and I believe this too. When you have massive human rights violations and things like that.
No, speak up a little bit.
Excuse me. Yeah, massive human rights violations. I think there's a time and a place where we as a world need to come together and intervene in situations to help people who need it. I think we've crossed a line at some point. I don't know when it was, but we've crossed a line where we're no longer just looking to help people out, but we're policing the world. And there's a difference between intervention and having standing troops around the world just as police, basically. Right. And I think any action that we take should be taken through the UN. I think that's important, just to make sure that everybody is on board. We don't need to have these weird allegiances where we're strong arming other countries, because then that brings you back to this bullying that you see all over the world.
Well, so if we had a conservative sitting here, they would probably say, what? The UN violate our sovereignty? We have the right to go out and do this stuff. I mean, because their view is, it's kind of a Cold War view, and now it's kind of a worldwide terrorism view. That we need these enemies. So we need phantoms. This is something that the founding fathers, John Adams, warned us about creating monsters overseas. But that's another lesson that appears to be lost over time, and people don't even understand that one of the things our military is doing is prepping us for additional fear, additional things to be scared about. In this case, what's still with Russia. Let me clarify that. When we're policing the world, we think we are protecting the homeland, or at least that's the story that a lot of people believe. You and I think completely differently. We don't think that there are really credible threats to American citizens and American prosperity in these far-flung places. I think we've got bases in something like 80 countries and territories, right? So
insane.
And I think we got something on the order of about 1,000 bases. So we are present all over the world. And I believe in Obama's last year on Labor Day, I believe American bombs were dropping on 7 countries. So Americans aren't understanding that, or they're not feeling the pain, or it's not being expressed through the current party system. So how do we deal with that? So we're at minute 20 now. Are we on target with the arc of our story here? Because I'm throwing out some open-ended questions here.
Yeah, I think so. If we're kind of coming up to talk about how people are experiencing this, I think it's worth talking about the cost of war, because that's right. People are starting to realize this now.
Yeah.
How much it costs us in terms of time, but also money. I mean, over the past, how long have we been? 18 years? Is that
right?
So since 2001, we spend somewhere on the average of $35 million every hour for the wars that we've waged since 2001. And people you don't see that every day.
Yeah.
But it adds up.
Well, I should say so. That's a hard figure for people to keep in their heads, for them to understand. I mean, we understand. I mean, if you follow government and you follow politics, you understand how budgets are made and how spending goes on in a fairly uncontrolled way. Because we just saw that. I think President Trump tweeted the Republicans just busted the budget caps, and I'm embarrassed, and I'm a Republican. So he's so I saw that just this morning briefly. But we are spending a lot, and so not only does it cost a lot of money, which clearly must affect our prosperity. If we're taking money out, we don't have that money at home to buy the things that we need. whether it's healthcare, education, all the retirement funds, all the things that people need to buy to have a happy life. Those things are very expensive right now. It's very difficult. And I know someone who felt like, I know the feeling of downward mobility as you go through these crashes and cycles and joblessness and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult time, despite the fact that we seem to have, pretty close to very full employment. I don't know if I totally believe those figures, but so there's the cost domestically, but we talked about this yesterday a little bit, the obliviousness that a lot of American voters have to the actual destruction on the ground of living people.
Right.
So if you think about the Iraq situation in the 90s, that sort of set Osama bin Laden off, the fact that we had the no-fly zone and the fact that we were sanctioning them on the idea that we need to starve the population in order for them to overthrow the regime. So that's part of this regime change model that we're talking about. And as it's emerged over time, that's part of the playbook. And so that's what we're now doing in Venezuela. But when you think of the costs, when you think of the restrictions on their international trade, Americans don't think of that as war.
Right.
But we are imposing this incredible cost on other people, and we're corrupting our own banking system, through the Office of the Treasury, the Office of Foreign Asset Control. We are imposing these restrictions on people. And it's not only whether we're the policemen of the world, we're everything. We're the nanny. We're the benefactor if you play ball with us.
Yeah.
So we're like the Pablo Escobars. It's like silver or lead, right? So I've been babbling, but I want you to talk more about what you think of the costs of war, both domestically and abroad.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. And this is something, like you said, we even see it in the 50s, this idea that you can starve a population. And that was part of the sanctions that they introduced in Iran.
Yeah.
They created so much turmoil. They had, they seeded some stuff through the CIA and other agencies. But then part of it was economic pressure that they put on what was his name again? I'm sorry, the democratically elected in Iran.
Are you talking about the Shah or Ahmadinejad?
I don't know, in the 50s.
Mossadegh.
Mossadegh,
yeah.
So they put that kind of pressure on him, and they starved resources and things like that. And I think now that we have perhaps a more democratized way of broadcasting things and getting media around the world, we're going to see that change quite a bit. People are going to become more aware.
Yeah.
To what extent, I don't know. I think it's still difficult. But I think that's one of those costs of war that people don't think about too much, is just the human cost. Like we're waging war even economically to starve people.
Yeah.
And that's not right.
So here's the question. We're gonna head toward, what time is it? Yeah. So we're gonna wrap this up in the next 5 minutes. So stay with us, because one of the things that we talked about is how the American public is willing to put up with it. And I see sort of 2 points here. One is that a lot of people simply have jobs that are connected to the government and connected to the military-industrial complex, so they don't want to speak up, and that's why they hate whistleblowers like Julian Assange so much. But then there's another self-delusion, and I've talked about this for a couple of years now. This whole idea of American exceptionalism. There are many other writers who've talked about this and looked at it, including the evil demon himself, Vladimir Putin. I mean, he had an editorial in the Wall Street, not in the Wall Street Journal, I think in the New York Times, sometime in the last 10 years, where he said flat out, if you think of yourself as an exceptional people, typically that doesn't end well. And so he's kind of warning Americans about thinking too highly of their capacities to do good in the world, because a lot of Americans think whatever we touch is good. We are the good guys. So if there was a conservative here, and I've got conservative friends, they would say, but we're the good guys. How can you say that about us? Because we're the Americans. We've got the flag, we've got the Constitution, we've got this wonderful history. We've freed the slaves, whatever it is. So they think very highly of what it is that we've done, what it is that we've created here. And so the idea that this would misfire, or that it would go off track, and that really we've allowed some of the worst people to get in charge, John Bolton, we've allowed some of the worst people to get in to take charge of a foreign policy and foreign mission. They just blank out. I mean, they can't think of that. So anyway, please step in.
And I think just kind of piggybacking on what you said there, there's a sense of paternalism. I think that goes into this, and that's probably for another conversation. But this whole idea that we'll starve somebody just so that we can give food to them and feel good about it.
That's horrible. Mm-hmm. That's horrible. Yeah.
But you see that all over. I mean, that's the model. You look at like NGOs and like nonprofits. You see that shifting a little bit, trying to do.
Yeah. So let's define NGOs, because some of these organizations, they go into a foreign country and they set up, and there's some voluntary pretext. We're going to do some organizing. But they're not ever explicitly mandated to, do regime change or affect the government. But we know that that's exactly what they're doing. They're agents of influence. So not only are your tax dollars going for potentially bombing people and paying for sanctions and paying for this massive surveillance system and all that other stuff, but we're also paying for these insider groups, right? These feel good sounding groups, the National Endowment for Democracy or whatever it is, the NED. And so that's happening all over the world too. So would you call that paternalism?
Not necessarily, but I mean, I think it does play into it. I think more along those lines of, so one example that I like is the shoe company Toms, right? This is a company a lot of people know about, where you buy a pair of shoes, they give a pair of shoes to a child.
Oh, okay.
In another country, right? And in a sense, they're using that philanthropy to bolster their own business model, because that's their company, that's what they're known for, and so they capitalize on the suffering of other people, and they solve the problem in a way that doesn't really solve it. But in a sense, just creates more destabilization. So.
I guess that raises a whole other set of questions about the way that we engage in commerce with other countries. Because as a libertarian, and many anti-war conservatives are also tagged with this idea of isolationism, right? That we don't want to be involved, when in fact it's really just the opposite. We do want a sort of a freer flow of people. We want a freer flow of culture. We want a freer flow of capital. We want businesses to be able to come here and compete, and we want businesses to go there and compete. The problem is when it's big resource companies, the oil industry in particular, because I don't think it's a secret to anybody around the world that most of the wars are over oil resources, right? And most of the sanctions that are being put in place are not because we think other people are particularly evil. It's just that we like to paint them as evil, so we can impose these restrictions on their behavior in order to help our competitors. So again, just going back to the beginning, which is I was talking about my platform, and I said I talked about being the anti-war candidate, and then I would talk about I'm anti-corruption. I don't think the government should be picking winners and losers, but that's a bad domestic policy, and it's a bad foreign policy. So you're right, the paternalism comes in when we think, hey, That's the NSA and the CIA interrupting this stream. So now that we've got a little quiet, we can go ahead and skip to the end here. But my main point here, to be clear, is that this idea of picking and winners in the domestic economy is acceptable to a lot of Republicans and Democrats because they think they know better than the rest of us about what sort of business models should prevail. And it's the same around the rest of the world. We're essentially picking winners. Saudi Arabia is a winner. The head chopper barbarians of Saudi Arabia are the winners. Those are the people that we want to be friends with, that we want to be allies with, that we want to sell weapons to. Yet the Iranians are the demons. They're going to be the losers. So there you go. That's what I think. So do you have anything to add to that? So we talked about exceptionalism. You know, we talked about sanctions and this whole idea of what we're doing in the world and really how to think about it.
Right.
Is there anything you want to add about how the Green Party hopes to what's his name, Hawkins?
Howard Hawkins,
yeah.
Right.
So he's what's his approach to this problem?
So he's kind of right along party lines. So
Yeah,
he's the person who authored the Green New Deal
Okay.
before the Democrats kind of co-opted it and
Okay.
watered it down.
Okay.
But that's his position: is demilitarization, anti-imperialism through
Right.
scaling back military funding and
Okay.
reinvesting that money back into our own economy to create
Yeah.
infrastructure, things like that.
Right. So I think there's, what's funny is I think there's probably a lot of conservatives who might actually agree with him that there are anti-war conservatives out there. Let's give them some credit. And there's still some anti-war liberals. We just don't see them that much. And they like the idea of sort of repurposing a lot of those people because obviously we know that every congressional district has a hand in the military-industrial complex, that they want jobs. If they're going to if you need a new base, everybody's fighting for having that base in their district if you need it. And so the military knows that they can't concentrate their assets in one place. They got to spread them around, which is why it's a very networked system. It's a patchwork, and that's how they keep the power they keep. And so we don't know if we can solve this problem in one election, but we can inform voters about how to think about this problem. Because this is really a dead-end street, very, very much a dead-end street. Perpetual spending for perpetual war it could decimate the planet. And, there's nothing worse for the environment than dropping a lot of bombs on people.
It's true. And just to point out that the U.S. Department of Defense is the world's worst polluter.
Yeah. They're the worst bomber, the worst polluter, and they're the most renegade spender. And they don't like to be audited. Do we think we have a problem here? Anyway, we're going to wrap up. Thanks for listening. Next week, we're going to be here, hopefully again on time, and we'll have the problem of the name of the show resolved.
That's right.
From our board of directors. We need to come up with something catchy. Anyway, again, Jeff Scott for Congress is my website, and Alan's is...
Alan, do I have it on my shirt here? No, I don't. It's on the back. AlanForCongress.com.
If you have any questions, please go to my Facebook page where we're streaming this live, or go to Alan's page. I'll be happy to answer questions. On Facebook, it's social media. It's not anonymous. We can see your name, but you can say anything you want. You can, and people do. And the only thing that I delete is just pure vulgarity or people kind of spamming with dumb memes and stuff like that. But for the most part, your comments are going to stay there, especially if they're thoughtful. We do like to respond to thoughtful voters. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, bye-bye.
See ya.
How long did that go?
It was.
I was going to hit this thing
It was
twice.
only like 35, maybe